Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the art of pivoting your life. And if you'd like to call in for help pivoting your own life, you can do so by calling 516-623-1240. This is a half-hour show, so you've got a little bit of time to call in. And in the meantime, I, of course, always am prepared with lots of material to chat with you guys about. And firstly, I'm super excited. My good friend Chelsea and I have put together a retreat in Mexico. And if you've listened before, I talk about ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome a lot, and Cassandra syndrome is along with that. And this retreat is for women who have been in or are currently in a traumatic relationship. And our focus is on healing, but also fun. The retreat facility is a good friend of mine's, the owner, and I met her when I lived in Mexico. And it's a beautiful location in the Baja area of Mexico, which, if you're not familiar, that's south of California, basically, in the Cabo San Lucas area, but it's about an hour and a half outside of Cabo. And it's going to be a lot of fun. The maximum amount of people is 17, but my expectation is somewhere around 12 to 14 people. And it will be a lovely, intimate sort of setting. We'll be doing some healing work. We'll be having fun. It's taking place November 1st through the 6th. And those first 2-3 nights, we will be able to go to Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead celebrations. And if you're not familiar with that, in Mexico, they celebrate the people and their loved ones that have passed. And if you've seen the Disney movie Coco, they kind of go into those traditions. And it's really beautiful celebration of life. And to be there during that time is just a ton of fun. So that's why I, in part, chose that time. And so if you're interested, there's information on my website. It's called the Healing Cassandra Retreat. And my website is zenmindmichelle.com. That's ZenMindMichelle.com. And if you fit in the traumatic relationship realm, definitely check it out. We would love to have you with us. And I also have a Healing Cassandra program, which is hypnotherapy and coaching, which you will also find information on. So today, if we don't get any callers who need help and guidance, we are going to talk about the ego. And we touched on this last week too, but the ego is so important. It's, it shapes our thoughts, our emotions, our behavior. And if you have studied A Course in Miracles or other spiritual sort of texts, really our ego is the thing that gives us the human experience, because it is that thing that's telling us we're separate. When in fact, I believe we are all connected to each other. And we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and the ego is a big part of that. And so many people like to vilify the ego, and they want to kill their ego and things like that. And really that's just silly, because we can learn to see our ego, we can learn to recognize it, we can learn to work with it and understand what it's doing, because the ego is an essential part of our personal growth and self-awareness. And it's also a big fat liar. So sometimes our egos are, really working with our subconscious and those sort of beliefs, and can show us the programming we've received as a child that is now affecting our lives. And so the ego, if you're not familiar, it's the part of us, the part of our psyche that identifies us as I. And it's concerned with self-preservation, our identity, and then of course creating that feeling, knowing, whatever, that the concept that we are separate from each other and separate from God, the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it. So our ego manifests as that voice in our head. It's narrating our experiences. It's all about judging, judging others, judging ourselves. And the ego is also seeking validation and control. So just understanding what the ego is part of this work, I think. Its primary function was to and is to protect us from perceived threats. And, we don't have the same threats that we used to have when we were cave people. And its other job is to maintain a sense of identity and control. But in doing that, it can cause us suffering and conflict when it becomes overreactive or rigid. And so when we talk about ego, I'm not talking about egotistical, which is more, that comes from the ego, but we're just talking about that sense of self. And when we're working with our ego and we're working with healing from any sort of situation, but of course I work a lot with traumatic relationships. The ego is in charge by looking at patterns and tendencies. And some of the ways we can recognize when the ego is in charge is by observing those patterns and observing the tendencies. And I talked about mindfulness before. I'm sure mindfulness practices are so important when you're healing. And the reason why is there's sort of this, it's a base practice to train your brain and even your conscious self to be in that observer mode, to get to a place where you can pay attention to your thoughts, notice your emotions without judging them. So we're sort of mindfully putting the ego away and setting it aside. And then we can notice when the ego is trying to get your attention. And usually when the ego is trying to get your attention, that means you are doing something right. And the ego's like, I no, I need you to come back to me. So it's good if you've noticed that. So you can notice things when you're doing mindfulness and getting into that place of non-judgment. And meditation, of course, is a mindfulness practice. And meditation can be really anything. Earlier today, I was talking with some people about meditation, and it's like I could make doing dishes a meditation. I could make mowing the lawn or doing yard work or dancing or anything really can be done mindfully and as a meditation. So you don't have to think of meditation as being, sitting with your mind clear, because our minds are never clear. We have thoughts. So if you do a more traditional quote unquote meditation, doing it in a way that you're not judging yourself for when the thoughts start coming back in, because it's totally normal. And what you would want to do is just focus on your breath. Even if you have to say breathing in and breathing out or in, out, whatever, that can be a way to just pull yourself back into your body. Because mindfulness in some ways is kind of about getting us back into our bodies and being present in the moment. One of my favorite shows on Netflix is called The Midnight Gospel. And if you're not familiar with this show, it is crazy. And there's cuss words and stuff. But in this show, they talk a lot about various mental health and addictions and all kinds of things. And it's Duncan Trussell, and he did a podcast. So they basically turned his podcast into this crazy cartoon. But they're having these really meaningful conversations that are fascinating to me. And in the last episode, his mom is on, and he actually did this show because his mom had cancer, and he was kind of working through, his fears of death and losing his mom, knowing it was coming, and on all of that. And she was on the last episode, and she talks about mindfulness and meditation, but in mindfulness, he was asking her, like, what can you do if you're, in a van by the river, and you don't have any money? Like, what can you do? And she talks about a practice that I find very interesting to experience myself, and so I thought I would share it. And that is just sensing the inside of your hand. And so, just sitting, focusing on what does the inside of my hand feel like? And by inside, like the bones and the muscles, and like, what can you sense? And sensing that without judgment, just noticing. And then noticing, you can even start with a finger and then, expand that to your whole hand. And then maybe you can sense the inside of your feet. And then maybe you can do your legs and your arms and so on. So just a very simple mindfulness practice that you can do is just taking a moment to sense the inside of your body. and what do you notice? Maybe the temperature, or how do you feel your heartbeat, all of those things. And another way to work with your ego is just in the mindfulness practices but noticing your thoughts and observing the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are going on from a neutral standpoint. Noticing, hey, I'm feeling defensive, or even looking back on a situation. Maybe you had an argument with somebody or something, or you saw something on the news and you got triggered. And then looking back at that and just saying, oh, wow, why was I being judgmental? What was going on there? I'm noticing I was being judgmental. I was being reactive. And these defensive, judgmental, reactive feelings in situations are, signs that the ego is asserting itself. It's seeking to protect its identity and maintain control. And so you can take a look at that and go, oh, okay, that's my ego. That's my ego talking. And you can start noticing the patterns that you see along with that. And obviously, emotional triggers, paying attention and reflecting on situations or interactions that trigger any sort of strong emotional reactions. Maybe it's anger or sadness or fear. And you can see what's going on. These triggers can provide valuable insight to the ego's attachment to certain beliefs, expectations, desires. And, you can explore those fears or insecurities that may be driving the reactions that you're dealing with. Looking at when you resist change. And let me tell you, we all do it. Nobody likes change, but change is inevitable. So being aware of that resistance to change, or when you notice you're clinging to a familiar pattern and routine, even if it's not serving you. The ego is often seeking to maintain the status quo and avoid things that are uncertain. And we've talked about this before. The mind loves what's familiar, and really it's the ego that loves what's familiar because it's there to protect you. It's there to keep you safe. And if it's familiar, then it's considered safe because it didn't kill you. And noticing when you're defensive is really a good way to notice the ego is feeling threatened or challenged. And maybe it wants to blame someone and make them wrong or justify your actions. It's getting defensive. So practice pausing and reflecting before you react. And that allows you space to consciously choose how you want to respond, and maybe get into a space of compassion. Because what we have to realize is everyone is simply doing the best they can with what they have. And maybe someone has had the crappiest day ever, and whatever happened between you this could be a cashier at the store or somebody that's driving or whatever. Maybe they had 1% that they could give that day, and they're doing their best with that 1%. And we can choose to have compassion from a place of not knowing their situation and not needing to know, and just offering compassion, because we can change someone's day in a second by offering compassion and not getting defensive and letting our ego take control. And the ego loves labels and roles and identities, and it loves the job titles and social status and relationship statuses. So another way to see your ego is just noticing when your sense of worth and identity is coming from external factors rather than your inherent value as a human. Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. You are worthy. You are good enough. And if we can even be willing to let go of the attachments that we have to identities and labels and roles and all that stuff, and let go of them and embrace being our authentic self, and having an authentic sense of self, and letting go of the programming that we've received, we can notice our egos, and we can really work with it. Because cultivating self-awareness and observing these patterns and tendencies can really help us recognize when the ego is coming in and being in charge, and we can stop ourselves and like I said, choose to respond from a place of grace, presence, compassion, authenticity. And the more of us that heal and that do this work, the better our world is going to be. Can you imagine a world where we all choose compassion? I mean, I know it's a pipe dream for some might think, but man, what a great world that would be. And a way to work with our egos is, we talked a little bit about shadow work last time. Shadow work is a way that we can explore and integrate these unconscious aspects of the psyche, and confront and embrace our shadow selves. So we might have, like, I have a shadow self that's 2 that came along, and she felt like if she did something wrong, then she needed to feel shame. And shame meaning, I am a bad person. I am not worthy. I am not enough because of the shame. And that's, oh my gosh. Where did this come from when I was 2? So working with your inner child is important, because the ego is involved in these shadows and will throw us up at them all the time. So we can work with our shadows to understand and transcend the ego's limitations. And it can really, again, we can have greater authenticity, compassion, we can feel whole, and we can let go of those programs that are telling us BS, like my little inner 2-year-old that thought that because she did something wrong, she was a bad person, and needed to feel shame. And some of the interesting things that, the resistance to change thing is something that I think is important for us to notice. But working with our shadow is going to involve integrating the disowned or suppressed aspects of ourselves into our conscious awareness. So just by seeing, oh, I have a shadow and it's telling me this. Oh, I know. Well, my parents never gave me approval or told me I was right about anything. So that means I need someone to tell me I'm right somewhere, and I'm going to be a people pleaser, and I'm going to be codependent, and I'm going to seek approval from outside of myself from every single person I meet, even if they are mean and not a great person for me to have in my life. I'm going to be seeking that approval. So seeing these shadows and integrating them and seeing them for what they are is a way for us to stop those actions and to stop people pleasing or whatever it is that we're doing. And if you've heard of Gabor Mate, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is compassionate inquiry. And that's, getting again into the work of being compassionate with ourselves. So instead of judging these parts of ourselves, we are coming at them from compassion, openness, trying to understand, what is this need? Why am I acting this way? Oh, it's the little 5-year-old me that was playing t-ball and that the coach yelled at. These are all things that we can work with. And it is easier, obviously, when you're working with someone, because the thing about shadows is they're difficult to see for ourselves. And when you're working with someone, they'll ask you the question that you need to be asked in order to see what you need to see. So working on that is great yourself, if you can really see your triggers for what they are, which is, okay, this is something going on with my ego. Let me explore that. And if you're able to do that, that's so fantastic. But if you need help working with someone, whether it's a therapist or a coach, or I'm a coach and hypnotherapy is the easiest way to get at shadow work and get at what the ego is doing. But embracing these parts of ourselves and giving them love, a lot of times will really shift what's going on in our mind and with our egos. The ego's patterns of working with us and these shadows are essential parts of the journey towards gaining greater self-awareness, authenticity, and wholeness. And if you believe in, us being vibrational beings, authenticity is actually like the highest vibration you can be at. It's even higher than love. And I think in part it's because being authentic is the best way to love ourselves. And it can be just so beautiful. So, shining a light on the ego and these unconscious motivations and fears, we can get rid of those limitations of the ego and have a more expansive and integrated sense of self. So things like journaling, meditation, therapy, like I talked about, are all important in that. Exploring your triggers, looking for unconscious beliefs that your parents may have given you, looking at emotional patterns are, great ways to do these practices of shadow work. And we're already out of time, so I appreciate everyone for listening. And again, if you want to work with me, my website is zenmindmichelle.com, which is ZenMindMichelle.com. Thank you so much, everyone.